The Battle of Saratoga, America's decisive victory. The year was 1777, and the American Revolution had been raging for over 2 years. What had started as an isolated skirmishes between colonial militias and British troops had escalated into full-scale war. While George Washington's Continental Army struggled to hold the line in the face of British might, a decisive campaign was unfolding in the northern colonies. This would culminate in the Battle of Saratoga, a victory that would change the course of history. The British planned divide and conquer. British General John Burgoyne, an ambitious and confident officer, devised a plan that he believed would end the war in Britain's favor. His strategy was simple: march south from Canada along the Hudson River and capture Albany, New York. By doing so, the British would divide the rebellious colonies into two, severing New England from the rest of the colonies and strangling the Revolution's heartland. Burgoyne's force was impressive. He commanded around 7,000 British regulars, German mercenaries, Hessians, and Loyalist forces. Along with them, he had a large artillery train, Native American allies, and an assortment of camp followers. It was an army that inspired fear and demanded respect. However, as Burgoyne's army pressed south, the reality of the American wilderness set in. Dense forests, swamps, and uncharted terrain slowed their advance. Supply lines became stretched, and Burgoyne was forced to rely on foraging for food. Worse still, the American militia, led by skilled officers like Benedict Arnold, harassed them constantly with guerrilla-style tactics. Every step of the way, the British found themselves ambushed, supplies raided, and morale dwindling. American forces prepare. Meanwhile, the American forces had been tracking Burgoyne's movements. General Horatio Gates was placed in command of the Northern Department of the Continental Army. He and his officers knew that this British invasion had to be stopped at all costs. Gates' army, bolstered by local militias, numbered around 15,000 by the time Burgoyne approached the Hudson River near Saratoga. Although Gates was the overall commander, one of the key figures in the upcoming battle was a man who would later betray his country, Benedict Arnold. Arnold, though often impulsive and insubordinate, was a brilliant tactician, and his aggressive nature would play a pivotal role in the coming fight. The battle begins Freeman's Farm. The first major engagement between the two forces took place on September 19, 1777, at Freeman's Farm. Burgoyne was attempting to push through the American defenses to continue his march toward Albany. The British met fierce resistance from the Americans, who fought from the cover of dense woods and stone walls. The British managed to hold their ground, but it came at a tremendous cost. Burgoyne's forces suffered heavy casualties, losing many officers and experienced soldiers. Worse still, the Americans retreated in good order and regrouped. Though the battle was technically a British victory, it left them weakened and stuck in place. The turning point, the Battle of Bemis Heights. As days passed, Burgoyne's situation became increasingly desperate. His supply lines were cut off, and reinforcements from New York City under General William Howe never came. The British were stranded and surrounded by an ever-growing American force. Meanwhile, inside the American camp, tensions were rising between General Gates and Benedict Arnold. Gates, cautious and defensive, preferred to wait for Burgoyne to exhaust himself. while Arnold pushed for an aggressive assault to end the campaign. On October 7th, Burgoyne attempted one last desperate attack at Bemis Heights, just south of Saratoga. As his troops advanced, they were met with fierce American resistance. Benedict Arnold, although technically without a command due to his disputes with Gates, took matters into his own hands. Defying orders, he rode to the front lines and led a daring counterattack against the British. Arnold's charge was reckless but effective. Leading American troops through a hail of gunfire, Arnold personally directed assaults on key British positions, including the Bremen Redoubt, a fortified area held by German soldiers. Despite being wounded in the leg, Arnold's actions inspired the Americans to push harder, and by the end of the day, the British forces were in full retreat. The surrender at Saratoga. Burgoyne's army, exhausted and demoralized, retreated to the small village of Saratoga. With no hope of reinforcements and surrounded by the Americans, Burgoyne was left with no choice but to surrender. On October 17, 1777, Burgoyne formally surrendered his entire army to General Gates. The impact of the American victory at Saratoga was profound. Not only had the Continental Army captured a large British force, but they had also proven to the world that they could stand toe-to-toe with Britain's best. The victory at Saratoga convinced France to enter the war on the side of the Americans, providing the much-needed supplies, troops, and naval power that would ultimately tip the scales in favor of the revolutionaries. The aftermath, a turning point. The surrender at Saratoga marked the beginning of the end for British hopes of crushing the American Revolution. While the war would continue for several more years, the tide had turned. With France now in the fight, Britain faced a global war, and the American colonies had found new hope. Benedict Arnold's heroics at Saratoga would be overshadowed by his later treachery, but his role in the battle cannot be understated. Saratoga was not just a military victory, it was a psychological one. It showed the world that the American dream of independence was not only possible, but within reach. The Battle of Saratoga remains one of the most significant battles of the American Revolution, a testament to the resilience and determination of the American forces, and a key turning point in their struggle for freedom. Don't forget to click subscribe if you want more weekly updates on precise history. Thank you.